Hi, Jerry Mona with Boater Input. If you're shopping for a fishing boat, you may be debating whether to go with aluminum or pay extra for the fiberglass. Well, in today's video, I'm going to share with you my thoughts on the strengths of each type based on decades of experience as a boat owner. But before we get into it, I want to preface by saying that when I'm talking about aluminum versus fiberglass, I'm really talking about aluminum Mod V boats versus fiberglass bass boats, or aluminum deep Vs versus multi-species, because it's important that we talk about kind of the same basic hull type when we do this comparison. Now, I will say, growing up, I fished exclusively from aluminum fishing boats. That's all we had when I was a kid. But then when I bought my first 3 boats, they were all fiberglass. But the one that I have currently is in fact an aluminum fishing boat. So I've had years of experience with both boat types. And so we're going to talk about the advantages of each here in just a moment. And I'll start by saying that neither boat type is inherently better than the other. They each have their strengths. And so it really comes down to what are your needs and what are your priorities, which we'll get into in just a moment. So let's start by talking about the strengths of aluminum boats first. So one of the key reasons why folks buy aluminum boats instead of fiberglass is because they are lower in price. Generally speaking, an aluminum boat is going to be about 10 to 20% less than a comparably equipped fiberglass boat. In fact, earlier this year, I did a walkthrough of the new Tracker 215 Savage, and I compared it to a comparably equipped Nitro and found that the Tracker aluminum was about $14,000 or 18% less than the Nitro. But the initial purchase price shouldn't be your only reason for going with aluminum, and that's because you can negate that advantage by buying, say, a used fiberglass boat. So there are other things to take into account as well. Related to cost, the ongoing cost of an aluminum boat is going to be a little bit less as well, and that's because as a lighter boat, you can generally get by with a smaller and more efficient engine. For example, I've got an 18.5-foot aluminum fishing boat here, and I have a 154 stroke outboard. And with that, I can do about 60 miles an hour, which is fine for me as a recreational angler. But and when I go out a typical day of fishing, I usually consume 5 gallons or less of gasoline. So really not that bad. But I know that my neighbors that have a similar sized boat, but run a bigger engine, are going to use more fuel than I do. So the cost of ownership is a little bit less with aluminum. Another benefit of an aluminum boat is that they are, let's say, rugged, if you will. Just to give an example, my lake, I live on Lake Palestine in East Texas, and there are sections of the lake that are an absolute forest. And during certain times of the year, like in the early spring, I will go into the jungle or go wherever the fish are. And so, you know, I will run up against stumps and standing timber and brush. And for whatever reason, it doesn't bother me as much to get a scratch on my aluminum boat as it would if I was gouging the gel coat of my fiberglass boat. And probably related to that is it's going to be cheaper and easier to make that repair. So if your lake has a lot of timber or rock, then aluminum fishing boat might be advantageous for you. Another advantage of aluminum is launching and loading. And that's because they're a lighter boat. They're easier to get on and off a trailer. Now, many years ago, I lived in Wisconsin, and I fished a lot of the little glacier-formed lakes that are pretty small, and they have a lot of them have primitive boat ramps and are very shallow. And in some cases, you can't power on to your trailer. You have to pull your boat on or drift your boat on. And I had fiberglass boats at that time. Aluminum would have been a lot better for me in those situations, just because you can, maneuver it a bit by hand if you need to, and it doesn't take as much to float them on and off. So launching and loading is another benefit. And then finally, a final benefit of aluminum is they're a little bit less maintenance. And what I mean by that is, yes, you still have to wash your boat. Yes, you should periodically wax it, just like you do your car or truck, because you don't want your paint to fade. But you don't have to be as diligent with that like you do with the fiberglass boat, because you have to worry about oxidation and your gel coat getting faded and chalky. So there's a little bit less maintenance involved when you're dealing with an aluminum fishing boat. So I think the biggest advantage for a fiberglass boat comes down to ride quality. There's no question that the extra weight or mass of a fiberglass boat is going to handle the waves and chop better than an aluminum boat. You know, you take my boat, for example, I can take it out in, say, a 20-mile-an-hour wind, and I do, but I've got to go fairly slow, and you're going to get beat up a bit. Versus when I go out in my buddy's boat, in those similar conditions, the ride is much smoother, much more comfortable. So ride quality is definitely a plus for fiberglass. And so that may be very important if you're on a bigger body of water, or let's say you're a tournament angler and you need to run at speed regardless of conditions, then the ride quality of a fiberglass may be the way, be a big plus for you. Another advantage of fiberglass is stability. And what I mean by that is when the boat is at rest, whether you're just parked in a spot fishing or you're covering an area with a trolling motor, a fiberglass boat is not going to bounce around or tip as much as a lighter aluminum boat. And that aluminum boat, they tend to send a little higher up in the water, and being lighter weight, they're going to get blown around a lot more in the wind than a fiberglass boat. So that can make it really difficult to hold on to a spot in any kind of a breeze, especially if you don't have like a spot lock trolling motor to help you out. Another advantage of fiberglass boats is the comfort and features. Manufacturers of fiberglass boats are generally targeting a higher price point buyer, so the upholstery might be just a little bit nicer. And the console and the dash layout may be a little bit nicer as well, just because of the audience that they're targeting. So if that's important to you, then fiberglass boat. If you're looking for something higher quality, higher caliber of quality or plush luxury, then fiberglass is going to be an advantage there. And then finally, there's no question that a fiberglass boat, whether it's a bass boat or a multi-species, is going to be a cooler looking boat than aluminum, okay? You have not only sleeker lines that you can do with, a mold in a fiberglass boat versus what they can do with bending aluminum, but you also have a much greater number of options that you can do from a custom color standpoint, whereas with aluminum, your color choices are usually pretty darn limited. But I will say in recent years, the appearance of aluminum fishing boats has closed the gap a bit versus fiberglass. Between the Vexus and then Ranger Alpha and now the Tracker Savage, they're making them a little bit more rounded, a little bit sleeker, look more like a fiberglass boat. So they are definitely closing the gap in that regard, but the advantage still goes to fiberglass. So as I stated in the very beginning, the choice of aluminum versus fiberglass really comes down to your needs, usage, and priorities. For example, if you are someone who's very budget conscious and wants to save a little bit of money, or have a boat that's a little bit less, that requires a little bit less maintenance, or perhaps you boat on a smaller body of water, or your lake or river has a lot of trees and stumps or rocks, then an aluminum boat is definitely worth considering. On the other hand, if performance and ride quality are very important to you based on how you use your boat, let's say you're a tournament angler, you really need, going fast and having a comfortable ride is important, or you're someone who's looking for a higher caliber of quality and luxury, then a fiberglass boat is probably your better choice. Let me know your thoughts regarding aluminum and fiberglass and which ones you prefer and why down in the comment section down below. And if you liked this video and found it helpful, do me a big favor, click on that like button. Also be sure to subscribe to my channel to get my latest tips and advice to help you purchase, equip, and maintain your boat. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I will see you on the water.